He grabbed her wrist so hard her tray crashed to the floor, plates shattering, wine spreading like a dark wound across the marble. Every single person in that dining room looked away. Not one of them moved, not the businessmen in their $1,000 suits, not the women dripping in diamonds, not the security guards stationed at every door. They all stared at their food, their hands, anywhere but at her. Because they knew. Everyone in the Velvet Lantern knew the rules. You do not interfere. You do not look. You do not exist when men like these decide to have their fun. Noelle Mercer stood very still. Her wrist was turning purple. The man holding it, thick-necked, gold-chained, smelling of bourbon and cigarettes, grinned down at her with the kind of smile that has never once considered consequences. If that were you, what would you have done? Before this night ends, this waitress will do something nobody in this room will ever forget. And the most powerful criminal in Chicago will be forced to ask himself one question he hasn't asked in 30 years. Who exactly is she? If this is your first time here, welcome. Stories like this one, raw, unexpected, and absolutely unforgettable, are what we do. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss what's coming next. And when we're done tonight, drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The Velvet Lantern did not advertise. You did not find it on any map, any restaurant review, any food blog written by someone who actually wanted to stay alive. You found it because someone who trusted you handed you a card, matte black, no logo, just an address embossed in gold, and told you to be there at 9 and to dress like you meant it. The entrance was through a dry cleaning shop on West Huron Street, down a staircase that smelled of cedar and old money, and then through a set of double doors that opened into something that felt less like a restaurant and more like a place where the city's most dangerous secrets came to breathe. The ceilings were vaulted, the lighting was amber, every table had fresh flowers, white peonies, always, and the linens were changed between every course. The menu was handwritten, the wine list was not. And somewhere above the main floor, accessible only by a private elevator that required a key nobody had ever seen duplicated, was the VIP balcony where Lucien Vescari sat every Thursday night and watched his city move below him like pieces on a board he alone understood how to play. Nobody ate at the Velvet Lantern for the food. They ate there to be seen by him. Noelle had worked there for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. She knew this not because she was sentimental about the anniversary, but because she kept a journal, a habit her grandfather had drilled into her before she was old enough to understand why. Write down what you see, he used to say, sitting across from her at his kitchen table in Bridgeport, his hands wrapped around a cup of green tea, his eyes sharp as a man's half his age. Not what you feel. What you see. Feelings lie. What you see never does. She had filled 14 journals since she started working at the Velvet Lantern. None of them contained a single feeling. They contained faces, names when she could get them, patterns, who sat with whom, who looked nervous when a certain car arrived out front, who ordered a second drink the moment a particular man walked in, and who suddenly lost their appetite entirely. She wrote down table numbers and seating arrangements, and the way certain conversations stopped mid-sentence whenever a server came too close. She wrote down the names of dishes that were never on any menu, code words she eventually understood, for things that had nothing to do with food. She had never told anyone what was in those journals. Not her landlord, Mrs. Kowalski, who lived below her in the Pilsen apartment and sometimes slipped homemade pierogi under her door. Not her one friend from the community college she'd attended for 2 semesters before money became the kind of problem that required her full attention. Not even Detective Hannah Yoon from the Chicago PD Organized Crime Division, who had approached her twice in 3 years, once in the parking garage on Clark Street, once in the produce section of the Jewel Osco on Cermak, and asked, very gently, whether Noelle had anything she might want to share. Both times, Noelle had said no. Both times she had meant it. Not because she was loyal to the Vescari family. She had no loyalty to men who built empires on the fear of people who couldn't afford to fight back. She said no because she wasn't ready. Her grandfather had taught her something more important than how to throw a punch, or dislocate a shoulder, or break a grip without telegraphing the movement. He had taught her about timing, about the difference between acting and reacting, about what it cost to move too soon. A stone dropped at the wrong moment, he used to say, doesn't make a ripple. It makes a mess. She was waiting for the right moment. She just hadn't expected it to announce itself the way it did. It was a Thursday in November, the kind of cold Chicago evening that arrives not gradually, but all at once, as if the city remembered overnight that winter is not a suggestion. The restaurant was at capacity. There was a private party in the East Wing. She wasn't told whose birthday it was, but the flowers were red instead of white, which she had learned meant Lucian had personally approved the guest list. The kitchen was running 40 minutes behind on the lamb course, which meant the floor staff were spending an unusual amount of time at tables, making conversation they had not been trained to make. Noelle managed her section with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this so long that her body had learned to move without consulting her mind. Table 4 wanted still water. Table 7's husband was on his third bourbon, and his wife's smile was getting thinner with each one. The couple at table 11 had been arguing quietly since they sat down, something about a property in Lake Geneva, and she knew without being told that they would not order dessert and would leave the kind of tip that communicated their evening with each other rather than anything to do with her service. She noticed all of it. She showed none of it. The 3 men at table 16 arrived just after 10. She noticed them the moment they came through the double doors, because she noticed everyone the moment they came through the double doors. But these 3 arrived with the particular energy of men who had been drinking somewhere else first, and had come here not to eat, but to perform. They were young, mid-20s maybe, and wore their suits the way men wear things they haven't earned yet. Too tight in the shoulders, too shiny at the lapels. They laughed too loud at their own jokes before the punchlines arrived, which told her they were nervous about something they didn't want each other to see. She recognized 2 of them, low-level soldiers from the Bellini crew, which operated under Lucien's organization, but had always carried a particular flavor of cruelty that even some of the other captains found distasteful. The third one she hadn't seen before. Younger than the other 2, maybe 22, with the eager eyes of someone who wanted very badly to belong. She seated them. She took their drink orders. She did not make eye contact longer than courtesy required. The first comment came when she brought their bourbon. "You always walk like that?" The one on the left, Marco, she'd heard the others call him, leaned back in his chair with the loose confidence of someone who expected the world to lean toward him. "Like you're carrying something heavy." She set down the glasses. "Just the tray." Smart mouth on her. This from the one across from him. Denny, thick through the neck, a scar below his left ear that was too clean to have come from anything accidental. "I like it." She returned to the bar. The second comment came 20 minutes later when she brought the appetizers. Something about her uniform, something about her shoes. She didn't process the specific words so much as the intention behind them, the way the words were designed not to be heard by anyone else, to exist in that narrow space between her ears and their mouths where there were no witnesses and no accountability. She set down the plates without a word and walked away. Her hands were perfectly steady. Inside, in the part of her that her grandfather had never been able to fully train into silence, something cold and very old was beginning to wake up. "Not yet," she told it. "Not yet." The third incident was not a comment. Denny stood up from the table as she passed with a full tray, 6 water glasses, a bread basket, and a bottle of Barolo she'd been asked to deliver to table 9, and stepped directly into her path. Not accidentally. She could read bodies well enough to know the difference between careless and deliberate, and this was deliberate in every muscle. He did it with the practiced casualness of a man who had done it before and found it funny. The tray wobbled. She caught it. Not perfectly. One glass slid to the edge, but she caught it, and she steadied it, and she took 1 step around him. He stepped with her. The dining room had gone. Not silent exactly, but quieter. The subtle drop in ambient sound that happens when people who want to pretend they're not watching are listening very carefully. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second. "Excuse me," she said. "The way you say it when you mean it as a statement rather than a question." He smiled. Let her pass. She delivered the wine. She delivered the water. She returned the tray to the bar station and stood with her back to the room for 3 seconds and breathed the way her grandfather had taught her to breathe, when her hands wanted to do something her mind hadn't approved yet. In through the nose. Count to 4. Out through the mouth. Count to 6. Feel the floor under your feet. Know where you are. She knew where she was. She was in a room full of people who would not help her. She was 3 years into a job she had taken for reasons that had nothing to do with waiting tables. And somewhere above her, on a balcony she had never been invited to approach, A man who controlled this city's underground was watching whatever he found interesting about this particular Thursday night. She had thought that might be a business arrangement that was falling apart at table 7, or the nervous first-time guest at table 3 who had touched his jacket pocket 6 times in the last hour. In the way people touch things they're worried about losing. She had not thought it would be her. She was wrong. She found out later, much later, that Lucien Vescari had noticed her 3 months into her employment. Not because she had done anything remarkable, because she had done nothing remarkable in a way he had never seen before. He had watched servers come and go at the Velvet Lantern for 11 years, and every one of them eventually cracked in some way, grew too familiar with certain guests, grew too frightened of others, let their curiosity show, let their fear show, let something show. Noelle showed nothing. She moved through his dining room like a current of water that knew exactly where it was going and had no interest in being anything other than what it was. He had asked his manager about her once, casually, the kind of casual that meant he wanted an answer and had already decided he would get one. Good worker, the manager had said. Never complains, never late. Customers don't remember her, which in this room means she's doing something right. Lucien had said nothing. He had watched her for another 3 months. On this particular Thursday in November, he was on his second glass of Barolo, the good one, the 809, not the one she'd just delivered to table 9. When he saw Marco push his chair back from table 16 and say something to the young one, the new one, whose name he didn't know yet, he watched the young one's face do the thing that young men's faces do when they are being dared by someone they want to impress. The smile that is also a question, the nod that is also a surrender. Then he watched the young one stand up and walk toward the waitress. Lucien set down his glass. He did not pick up his phone. He did not signal to his security. He watched. The young one, she heard them call him Santi. She would remember the name later. In the same detailed, effectless way she remembered everything. Stopped her near the station by the eastern wall. He said something. She said something back. She had her hand on the tray the entire time, knuckles white, and Lucien noticed that even from the balcony, even at this distance, he noticed because he had trained himself to notice the things people tried not to show. She was angry, not afraid, angry. Then Marco was there too, and Denny, and the 3 of them had arranged themselves in the specific geometry of men who want to communicate that there is no direction you are permitted to walk. And she was standing inside that geometry holding a tray with nothing on it. And the dining room had gone fully quiet now, the kind of quiet that has weight. Marco grabbed her wrist. He grabbed it the way you grab something that belongs to you, fingers wrapped tight. No hesitation, no concern for what the person attached to it might be experiencing. The tray hit the floor. The sound was enormous in the silence. Plates shattered. A wine glass bounced twice before it broke and sent a dark arc of red across the white marble. Nobody moved. 43 people in that dining room and nobody moved. Noelle looked down at the broken plates. Then she looked up at Marco. Her face was calm. Not the calm of someone who is fine. The calm of someone who has decided something. "Pick it up," Marco said, and grinned at Denny. "Come on, be a good girl. Pick it up." The room waited. Santi was watching her with something that might have been discomfort or might have been excitement. With boys that age, it was sometimes impossible to tell the difference from the outside, and maybe from the inside too. Noelle crouched down. She picked up the largest piece of the broken plate. She set it carefully on the tray. Then the next piece. Then the next. Methodical. Unhurried. As if no one else were in the room at all. Marco said something she didn't fully register, something about the uniform, something about tips, the kind of words that existed only to fill the space of power he thought he held. She let the words pass through her the way water passes through an open hand. She stood up, tray in both hands, back straight. She looked at Marco for one long moment. "I'll send someone to clean the rest," she said, and then she walked away. Behind her, she heard Marco laugh. Heard Denny say something that made the others laugh too. She did not turn around. She walked to the bar station. She set down the tray. She picked up her order pad. And in the part of her mind that was always running a separate calculation, the part her grandfather had built, patient and precise as a clock, she registered 3 new pieces of information she had not had before this evening. Marco and Denny were performing for Santi. That meant there was something they needed him to see. That meant there was something happening tonight that required a witness from outside their usual circle. Denny had touched his jacket twice since sitting down. Not his lapel, not the way people adjust clothing. Lower, right side. The jacket was heavier on that side. And Santi, when the tray hit the floor, had not looked at the tray. He had looked at the elevator. The private elevator. The one that went to the balcony. She wrote nothing in her journal. She filed it in the part of her mind where things went when they were not yet complete but were clearly going somewhere. She picked up table 4's check. She went back to work. Above her, on the balcony, Lucien Vescari picked up his glass and held it without drinking. He was still watching her. And for the first time in a very long time, longer than he could precisely remember, he was not entirely sure what he was watching. He did not know yet that the woman moving between his tables in a plain gray uniform had 14 journals hidden in a waterproof box under her bathroom floorboards. He did not know that she could identify 27 members of his organization by face and had cross-referenced 11 of them with the financial discrepancies she had quietly cataloged over 3 years of listening to conversations she was not supposed to understand. He did not know about her grandfather, about the years of training that lived in her body like a second skeleton, about the promise she had made to herself at the age of 16 that she would use every skill she had been given to protect people who had no one to protect them. Not for glory, not for recognition, not even for justice in any official sense, but because someone had to, and she was someone, and she happened to know how. He did not know any of that. He knew only what he could see, and what he could see was a woman who had just been publicly humiliated and had walked away from it with more dignity than anyone in the room, including, if he was being honest with himself, him. He set down his glass. He thought, who exactly is this waitress? He did not yet have an answer. By the end of this night, he would have several, and none of them would be what he expected. The night did not slow down after Noel walked away from the broken plates. That was the thing about nights like this one. They never slowed down. They accelerated. Like a car with a brick on the gas pedal and no one at the wheel, everything moved faster once something had been broken, once someone had crossed a line they had pretended for years wasn't there. The dining room had returned to its careful performance of normalcy within minutes. Glasses lifted, forks moving, conversations resuming at precisely the volume that communicated we did not see anything, but underneath it, something had shifted. Noel felt it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure before a storm. Not in your ears, in your chest. She took table 4's payment. She refilled water at table 11, where the couple from Lake Geneva had lapsed into the particular silence of two people who have run out of things to say that won't make everything worse. She checked on the kitchen, where the lamb course was still running behind, and the sous chef was managing his stress the way he always did, by speaking exclusively in clipped Italian to no one in particular. She did all of it on the surface. Underneath, she was tracking table 16. Marco had ordered a third round without looking at the menu, which meant he wasn't thinking about the drinks. Denny was angled in his chair toward the eastern wall, not toward his companions, which meant he was watching something Noel hadn't identified yet. And Santi, the young one, had stopped laughing. Whatever performance he'd been brought here to witness, it seemed to have moved into a phase that required him to be still and pay attention. She didn't know what they were waiting for. She knew they were waiting. At 10:47, a woman came in through the double doors alone. Noel noticed her immediately because women who arrived alone at the Velvet Lantern were uncommon, and women who arrived alone with a leather messenger bag pressed against their ribs, like they were trying to keep their heart from escaping their chest, were uncommon in a different way entirely. She was mid-30s maybe. Dark coat, sensible shoes, the kind of face that looked like it spent most of its time being careful. She paused just inside the entrance and scanned the room with the rapid, involuntary eye movement of someone who was frightened and was trying to look like they weren't. Noel recognized that look. She had seen it on her own face once, a long time ago, in a mirror in a hospital bathroom, the night she sat with her grandfather, while the machines around him made their steady, indifferent sounds. That look that said, I am in a situation that has gotten larger than I planned for, and I do not know which direction is out. The woman saw an open table near the far wall and moved toward it without waiting to be seated. That was when Denny stood up. He didn't move fast. He moved with the deliberate leisure of a man who knows the exits and knows the room and knows that neither of those things is going to work in your favor. He walked toward the woman's table at an angle that looked casual if you weren't paying attention to angles, and he sat down across from her before she had fully settled into her own chair. The woman's face went rigid. She said something. Noelle was too far away to hear the words, but the shape of it was unmistakable. Short, sharp, the phonetics of get away from me. Denny smiled. He leaned forward on his elbows and said something back that lasted considerably longer than it should have, given the expression on the woman's face while she heard it. Marco hadn't moved from table 16. He was watching. Santi was watching Marco, which told Noelle that Santi was here to learn something from how Marco responded to whatever was happening, not from whatever was happening itself. She picked up a water pitcher. She walked toward the far wall. Not directly. She took the long route, stopping at table 8 to refill a glass that didn't particularly need refilling, then drifting naturally along the eastern aisle in the way that servers drift when they are moving between tasks and have no urgent destination. By the time she reached the woman's table, she had been in motion long enough that stopping there looked incidental. She refilled the water glass that had not yet been used. Up close, the woman was younger than she'd looked from across the room. Early 30s. There were shadows under her eyes that had nothing to do with makeup and everything to do with the particular fatigue of someone who hadn't slept well in several nights running. The messenger bag was on her lap, both hands pressed flat on top of it. Denny looked up at Noelle with the particular expression of a man who has been interrupted and finds it interesting rather than annoying, because the interruption is coming from someone he does not consider a threat. "We're fine," he said. "Of course." She set the water pitcher down. "Can I bring you a menu?" "We're fine," he said again, slower. Noelle looked at the woman. The woman's eyes were doing something complicated. They were saying several things at once, the way eyes do when the mouth has been told it is not permitted to speak. They were saying help and don't, and you don't understand what this is, and please in some order that Noelle couldn't fully sequence but didn't need to. "I'll come back in a few minutes," Noelle said. She walked back to the bar station. She set down the pitcher. For 14 seconds, she stood with her back to the room and thought, with the focused, undecorated clarity that her grandfather had spent 8 years building in her, about what she had just seen and what it meant, and what the cost of the next decision would be in the various directions it could go. The woman had not come here for dinner. The messenger bag was the whole point. Whatever was in it was the reason Denny had sat down at her table before she finished pulling out her chair, which meant they had known she was coming, which meant someone had told them, which meant this woman, whoever she was, had made the very specific and very dangerous error of trusting someone she should not have trusted and had walked into this restaurant believing she had a plan, and the plan had already been outpaced by events she didn't know were in motion. Noelle picked up a dessert menu she didn't need. She walked back toward the far wall by a different route this time, and as she passed the short hallway that led to the restrooms, she slowed just enough to clock the emergency exit at the hallway's end. The green light above it was on. The bar across the door was clear of obstruction. She filed that away. She was 3 feet from the woman's table when she heard Denny's voice drop into a register. She recognized the way you recognize a smell from childhood, not with your brain exactly, but with your body, with the part that predates language. "You're going to give me the bag," he said. "And then you're going to sit here and finish your water, and in 20 minutes you're going to walk out of here and go home, and tomorrow morning you're going to make a phone call and tell someone you made a mistake. That's it. That's all this has to be." The woman's voice, when it came, was so tightly controlled it barely qualified as a voice. "That bag is evidence of crimes committed against—" "I know what it's evidence of." He wasn't angry. That was the terrible thing about men like Denny. They were never angry. Anger implied that you considered the other person significant enough to affect your emotional state. "Do you know what I'm evidence of? I'm evidence of what happens when somebody decides to be brave at the wrong time in the wrong place." Silence. "Give me the bag." Noelle reached the table. She put the dessert menu down between them, between Denny's hands and the woman's hands, and she did it slowly, deliberately, the way you put something down when you want the act itself to occupy a moment long enough for something else to change. Denny looked at the menu, then at her. "What did I just say?" "Our creme brulee is very good tonight," Noelle said. "The kitchen uses a Tahitian vanilla. It's subtle. Most people don't notice it, but once they do, they can't stop tasting it." The woman stared at her. Denny stared at her. Behind her, across the room, she was aware of Marco standing up from table 16. She didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on Denny's face with the specific quality of attention that communicates. "I am not moving from this spot, and I am not pretending I don't know exactly what is happening here." "You need to walk away right now," Denny said, very quietly. I will, she said, after I take this lady's dessert order. Something moved across Denny's face. It wasn't anger, still. It was something colder than anger. It was calculation, the rapid, flat assessment of a man who is deciding whether a complication is cheaper to manage with words or with something that is not words. The woman said very quietly, so quietly that Noelle almost didn't catch it. Please don't. Noelle looked at her. Please, the woman said again. Her voice had broken into something honest, finally. The careful facade of a person trying to handle a dangerous situation with dignity had slipped, and underneath it was something raw and exhausted and 24 hours past its limit. You don't know what these people, they're not, you need to just go. You need to just leave. I'm trying to. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I'm trying to keep this from getting worse. So am I, Noelle said. Marco arrived at the table. He didn't say anything at first. He put his hands on the back of the empty chair beside Denny and stood there. And the geometry of 3 men and a woman in a corner of a room that everyone else in the room was carefully not looking at did its work without needing words. There a problem? Marco said finally. He was speaking to Noelle, not to Denny. No problem, Noelle said. Then maybe get back to your tables. I have a table right here. Marco tilted his head. The smile he was wearing was the same one he'd worn when he grabbed her wrist, patient, amused, the smile of someone for whom patience is not a virtue, but a weapon. You're a funny girl, he said. I noticed that earlier. Real funny. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. I know. The dining room had gone quiet again. Not all at once. It never happened all at once. But in that spreading wave, table by table, conversation by conversation, until the ambient sound of the room had dropped low enough that Noelle could hear the candle on the woman's table flickering in the ventilation current. Santi had moved closer. I was standing near the end of the aisle, not quite at the table, hands in his jacket pockets, watching with the particular focus of someone who has been told to watch and is trying to demonstrate that he knows how to do that correctly. Noelle thought, they brought him here to see this woman handled. That means the bag is significant enough that someone above Marco wanted it witnessed by someone outside the immediate crew. That means whatever the woman was carrying is large enough to make multiple people nervous. And that means the woman had been right. This was not a situation that was going to resolve quietly over dessert menus. She had known that when she walked over. She had walked over anyway. Her grandfather, in his later years, when his joints had started making the particular commentary of old bones, and he'd taken to teaching more than sparring, used to say something that had irritated her for years before she understood it. The moment you decide to act is not the moment of the action. It's earlier. It's the moment you choose which kind of person you are. Everything after that is just physics. She had made that choice at the bar station. 14 seconds of stillness, water pitcher in her hand. Everything after was physics. I need to ask you gentlemen to return to your table, she said, looking at Marco. The management would like to keep this area of the dining room available for other guests. Marco stared at her for what felt like a very long time. Then he laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised, the kind that escapes before it can be caught and examined. He looked at Denny. Denny's expression had not changed. Denny's expression had been the same, flat, patient, calculating, since this conversation started. Get someone else to handle this, Denny said. Not to Marco. To the air between them, as if he were reading from an internal procedure. We'll take her through the kitchen. The woman made a sound that was not quite a word. Noelle said, no. One word. The room was so quiet she could hear the ice in someone's glass settling 30 feet away. No? Marco repeated. No, she said again. Same weight, same flatness. You're not taking her anywhere. Denny looked at her for the first time with genuine attention, not the dismissive performance of a man dealing with an inconvenience, but the focused, recalibrating attention of someone who has just noticed that a variable in his calculation has a different value than he assigned it. You have any idea, he said slowly, who we work for? Yes, she said, and you're still standing there. Yes. A beat, too. Why? It came out genuine, not rhetorical, not a threat wrapped in a question. Genuine puzzlement, the kind that's hard to fake, because men like Denny rarely need to ask it. Noelle said nothing. The woman at the table had her hands flat on the messenger bag and was breathing in that shallow, deliberate way of someone managing their own panic with everything they had. And Noelle looked at her for 1 second, just one, and then looked back at Denny. Marco said, "Move her." It happened fast. Denny stood up and reached for the bag. The woman pulled back and half stood and said something loud, not words exactly, just volume, the involuntary protest of someone whose last boundary is being crossed. And the dining room, which had been pretending not to watch, failed entirely at pretending. 40-something people holding their breath. Noelle moved between them. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. She was simply on one side of the space, and then she was on the other side of the space, and Denny's reaching hand contacted her forearm instead of the bag, and she let it, and she used the contact the way her grandfather had shown her. Not to block, not to push, but to redirect. A subtle rotation of the forearm that turned Denny's grip into his own problem, his fingers closing on an angle that left him overextended. He felt it before he understood it. She could see that in his face, the half-second of confusion before the pain registered. The wrist flexed to a degree it was not designed to flex, and he pulled back and she released, and the whole exchange lasted less than 2 seconds, and looked, to anyone watching, like almost nothing. But Denny was looking at his wrist, and his face was doing something it hadn't done yet tonight. Something that, if you had to put a word to it, was close to the thing he never showed anyone. Marco took a step forward. "Touch her," Noelle said, "and I will make sure the manager knows exactly what is in that bag and who sent you to collect it." Silence. "I work in this room every Thursday night," she said. "I know every face at every table. I know which captains sit where. I know which man at table 3 has been sending money to an account in the Cayman Islands for the past 8 months. I know which car comes to the side entrance twice a month and what it drops off and who signs for it. I know things about this operation that your boss has been trying to find out for 2 years and hasn't been able to." She said all of it evenly. No tremor in her voice, no lift at the end of the sentences, like a woman reading a grocery list she had memorized long ago. And she said, "I know that the bag this woman is carrying contains financial records from the syndicate's treasury account, and that whoever ordered you here tonight is not the man on that balcony." The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. This one had texture. Weight. It pressed against the walls of the room and against the ears of 40 people who were now not pretending at all. Marco's smile had gone. Denny's hand had gone still. Santi, at the end of the aisle, looked like he was experiencing the particular vertigo of a young man who came to watch something simple and has found himself inside something that will not leave him alone for a long time. Above them, on the balcony, Lucien Vescari had set down his glass. He had not picked it back up. He was leaning slightly forward in his chair, not dramatically, just the inch or two of a man whose attention has been seized by something his body recognized before his mind caught up. And he was looking down at the dining room floor with an expression that the 2 security men stationed behind him had not seen in 11 years of service. He was looking at the waitress, not with the interest of a man who has noticed an attractive employee, not with the measured assessment of a man cataloging a potential threat, with something that had no clean name, recognition, maybe, or the cousin of recognition that arrives when you see something you did not know you were looking for. He pressed the button on the armrest of his chair. His head of security, a man named Carver who had been standing 4 feet behind him for the last 2 hours, materialized at his shoulder. "The woman at the table," Lucien said, quietly. The way he said everything, not soft exactly, but with the economy of a man who has never needed volume to be heard. "Who is she?" Carver studied the room. "Don't know her, not on any guest list." "The bag." Carver looked. Noelle was still standing between Denny and the seated woman, and the bag was still in the woman's hands, and the whole tableau was suspended in the particular stillness of a moment that has not yet decided what it will become. "I'll find out," Carver said. "Don't." Lucien's hand came up, one finger. "Not yet." Carver waited. "What do you know about Rocco Bellini's current operations?" Lucien asked. The question arrived in a conversational tone. It was not a conversational question. Carver was quiet for 3 seconds. "Treasury allocation's been irregular for 6 months. We thought it was the new counting system." "We were wrong." It wasn't a question either. Below them, on the dining room floor, Marco had made a decision. Noel could see it happening in the reorganization of his body, the slight drop of the shoulders, the shift of weight to the forward foot. Men made that particular physical adjustment when they had decided that words were no longer the appropriate instrument. He took a step toward her. She did not move back. The woman behind her made a sound, one sharp exhale, like a word that didn't make it out in time. Marco. The voice came from across the room. One of the older security men, a fixture of the Velvet Lantern for years, a man called Breslin, who handled the door and who had always struck Noel as someone who knew precisely where the lines were and watched other people approach them with the professional patience of a man who has seen what happens when they're crossed. That's enough. Marco turned. Management says clear the floor, Breslin said. He was standing at the edge of the main aisle with his hands at his sides and nothing in particular on his face. Take your table or take the door. A long moment. The dining room breathed. Marco looked at Noel. At Denny. At the bag. At the balcony above. One quick look, involuntary. The look of a man who has just remembered that he is being observed by someone whose opinion matters to him in the most consequential way possible. Then he straightened his jacket. We'll be back, he said. To Noel. Just to her, quietly, in the register of a man making a note in a ledger rather than issuing a threat, which made it considerably worse than a threat. He walked back to table 16. Denny followed. Santi, after one last look at the woman with the bag, something in his expression that Noel filed away without yet knowing what to do with it, followed too. Breslin walked back to the door. The room exhaled. Noel turned to the woman. She was sitting with both hands wrapped around her water glass, and her eyes fixed on the table, and her jaw set in the way of someone who is holding themselves together through sheer muscular effort. Are you all right? Noel asked. The woman laughed. It came out wrong, too sharp, too quick, with an edge that had nothing to do with humor. No, she said. I'm genuinely not. What's your name? A hesitation, then, Diane. Diane Marsh. Diane. Noel sat down in the chair across from her, the chair Denny had occupied. She sat down in it with the calm of someone who does not require permission to occupy space. What's in the bag? Diane looked at her. Why would I tell you that? Because I just stood between you and two armed men in a room full of people who were willing to let whatever happened to you happen, and I'd like to know what I just stepped into. Silence. I'm an accountant, Diane said finally. Her voice had dropped to the level of a confession. I worked for a financial services firm that processes revenue for several businesses connected to this organization. I've been working there for 4 years. 8 months ago, I started noticing discrepancies. Not small ones. She stopped, swallowed. Someone has been skimming from the treasury at a scale that I can't even say the number out loud in a public place. It's that large. And the bag. 3 years of records, transaction logs, shell account structures, wire confirmations, everything. She pressed her hands flat against it. I've been building the file for 6 months. I was supposed to deliver it to someone tonight who I thought could. She stopped again. Who was supposed to meet you here? Noel asked. Diane didn't answer. Diane. Someone I trusted, she said. Her voice had lost something, not volume, some structural quality underneath volume. Someone I thought was working against the corruption inside this organization. Someone who apparently. She pressed her lips together. Apparently told the wrong people I was coming. Noel looked at the bag. 3 years of financial records. Treasury discrepancies on a scale that couldn't be named aloud. A woman who had been building a case for 6 months and had trusted the wrong person and had walked into a room full of the wrong people at exactly the wrong time. And Marco, at table 16, not looking at them, which meant he was finished with the current approach and was already on the next one. And Denny, whose wrist she had bent 40 degrees past comfort, who was sitting very still with his phone on the table in front of him, not touching it, which was worse than if he were using it. And Santi, who kept looking at the elevator. She felt it then, the shift in the air that preceded something larger than a Thursday night conversation. The particular change in atmospheric pressure that her body had been trained to read the way other people read facial expressions. Something was coming. Not in an hour. Not after closing. Soon. We need to move, Noel said. Diane looked at her. Move where? They know I'm here. They knew before I walked in. If I go out the front, not the front. Noelle was already doing the geometry. Kitchen to service corridor to loading bay to West Huron where there was an Uber waiting for a restaurant supply driver and a side street that bent away from the direction Marco's people would assume. She had walked that route twice in 3 years, not because she'd planned for this exact situation, but because she always walked every possible exit within the first week of any new space she occupied. Her grandfather's habit, hers now. "You trust me?" Noelle asked. Diane stared at her. "I don't know you." "No," Noelle said, "but you just watched me stand in front of 2 armed men for a woman I don't know, so you have some data." A breath. Another. "Okay," Diane said, quiet, decided. "Okay." Noelle stood up. She straightened her uniform. She picked up the dessert menu from the edge of the table and tucked it under her arm with the practiced normalcy of a server wrapping up a table visit. And she said, in the clear, carrying voice of someone making ordinary restaurant conversation, "I'll get you a to-go box for that," and then walked at a measured, unhurried pace toward the kitchen. Diane, after 3 seconds, stood and followed her. They were halfway across the dining room when Noelle heard Marco's chair scrape back, and then Denny's. And then she heard Marco say, not loud, not urgent, calm, with the particular calm of a decision that had already been made, "Don't let them reach the kitchen." And Noelle understood, in the clean, undecorated way she understood things when time compressed, that she had just passed the point where this could be resolved by a dessert menu and a carefully placed remark. There was no more managing this from the inside. There was no more careful neutrality. There was only what happened next and what it would cost. And whether the skills she carried in her body like a second skeleton, built over years of a grandfather's patient, exacting love, were enough for what this particular Thursday night had decided to become. Her hands were steady, her breathing was even, her mind was already 3 moves ahead. And somewhere behind her, the men came. The kitchen doors swung open and the heat hit them both like a physical argument. Noelle moved through it without breaking stride. Behind her, Diane was close. Closer than necessary, the way people get close to the one thing in a room they've decided to trust, even when they're not sure they should. The kitchen was running full service. 6 line cooks, 2 sous chefs, the expediter calling tickets in a rapid-fire monotone that didn't pause for anything that wasn't food. The noise was enormous. Pans, fire, extraction fans roaring overhead, the clatter of plates moving from station to pass. Nobody looked up. In a kitchen like this one, the dining room was another country, and its problems stayed there. Noelle angled left, past the cold station, toward the corridor that ran behind the dry storage. She knew this path. She had walked it dozens of times on legitimate errands. Inventory checks, supply sign-offs, the occasional cigarette break she didn't smoke but had used as cover for walking the building's perimeter in her first weeks on the job. The corridor was narrow, lit by a single fluorescent tube that buzzed like a trapped insect, and it smelled of cardboard and industrial cleaner and the particular cold that leaked through the concrete walls from the loading bay beyond. She pushed through the door at the corridor's end without slowing. The loading bay was empty. A single overhead lamp. Metal dock, rubber bumpers, 2 pallets of linen supplies stacked against the far wall. The service door that opened to the alley was directly ahead, and above its push bar the green exit light bled down onto the concrete floor in a color that made everything look like the bottom of a swimming pool. "This way," Noelle said. Diane was breathing hard. Not from exertion, they hadn't run, but from the specific physical effort of trying to hold yourself together when everything in your body is telling you to come apart. "Where does this come out?" "West Huron, north side. There's an alley that cuts to—" The corridor door banged open behind them. Not Denny, not Marco, Santi. I was alone, which was the first unexpected thing. He was holding his hand slightly away from his body, which was the second, and which communicated in the physical language that Noelle had spent years learning to read, that he was not reaching for anything and wanted her to know that. He was breathing fast. His face was younger than it looked in the dining room. The ambient theater of the velvet lantern aged everyone, all that amber light and dressed power. And under the loading bay fluorescence, he looked exactly like what he was, a 22-year-old who had gotten into something and was now visibly reassessing the terms. "Wait," he said, to Noelle, not to Diane. "Just wait. You have about 30 seconds before the other 2 figure out where we went. Noel said. I know. He ran a hand through his hair. I know. Just... He looked at Diane, then back at Noel. Something was moving across his face that she couldn't immediately categorize. It wasn't guilt exactly, but it was in the same neighborhood. She can't go to the street. Why not? Because there are 3 cars on the block. Rocco sent them an hour ago. All 3 exits from this building, front, side alley, loading dock, they're all covered. He said it fast, the way you say things you've been holding that have gotten too heavy. If she goes out any door, they take the bag and... He stopped. They weren't told to bring her back. The silence in the loading bay was very loud. Diane made a sound, not words. The sound a person makes when something they already half knew becomes completely, irreversibly known. Noel looked at Santi. How many in the cars? 2 in the front car, 3 in the alley car. I don't know the dock. 1, maybe 2. He was still holding his hands away from his body. I came here because Rocco told me I needed to see how it was done. That's all I was told. I didn't know it was... He pressed his mouth shut, opened it again. She has kids. Does she have kids? I have a daughter, Diane. Her voice was completely flat. She's 9. Santi closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them. I'm not part of this. You're standing in this building, Noel said. You're part of it. Then tell me what I can do. Noel looked at him for 3 seconds. The calculating 3 seconds that were never really about the 3 seconds, but about everything she could infer from posture, breath, eye contact, the particular quality of a person's stillness when they're either lying or telling the truth. And the difference between those 2 things is the only question that matters. He wasn't lying. She didn't trust him. Trust was a different calculation. But he wasn't lying. Is there any They don't have eyes on? She asked. The elevator shaft has a service hatch on the north wall of the building. Maintenance access. Comes out in the dry cleaning shop above. I know it, she said. She did. She had noted it 14 months ago, had never had a reason to need it. Can you get there without going back through the dining room? Staff stairwell. Doors at the end of this corridor behind the dry storage. Noel looked at Diane. Diane was watching Santi with the particular expression of a woman who has already been betrayed once tonight by someone she trusted and is now being asked to trust another stranger, and the math of that was written openly on her face. I know, Noel said to her, quietly. I know. Diane closed her eyes, nodded once. Okay. Go with him, Noel said. The service hatch opens with a standard fire key. There's one on the hook behind the dry storage shelving unit, second shelf from the bottom. Orange tag. Get to the dry cleaning shop and out to the street. Don't use your phone until you're 3 blocks away, and then call. I have someone, Diane said. Someone I didn't tell about tonight. Someone I know I can trust because I never told anyone about them. Call them. What about you? Noel had already turned back toward the corridor door. I'm going to give them somewhere else to look, she said. Diane grabbed her arm. The grip was surprising, firm, the grip of a woman who under different circumstances had a physical confidence she hadn't had much occasion to use tonight. You don't have to do this. I know. Then why? Because your daughter is 9, Noel said, and because I'm the one who knows this building and they don't know that yet, and because someone has to. She looked at Diane's hand on her arm, and then at Diane's face. Go. You have maybe 2 minutes before Marco checks the corridor. Diane let go. Noel went back through the corridor door. She walked quickly, not running, not yet, running in a kitchen-made noise and drew eyes, through the heat and the clatter, back toward the dining room doors, and she let herself be seen doing it. By the expediter who tracked her with his peripheral vision, the way kitchen staff tracked anything that moved at an unusual speed. By the garde-manger cook who looked up when she passed his station. By the sous chef who would remember, if asked later, that he'd seen the waitress Noel come through the kitchen twice in the last 10 minutes. She pushed through the dining room doors. Marco was standing 12 feet away. He'd positioned himself at the midpoint between the kitchen doors and the main entrance with the geometric instinct of a man who understood that controlling space was more valuable than controlling individuals. Denny was near the eastern wall. Between them and the kitchen entrance, there was no clean path that didn't require passing one of them. She walked toward Marco. Not away. Toward. He didn't move. He watched her come with the settled patience of a man who has decided that whatever was happening had already resolved in his favor. "Where is she?" he said. "Ladies' room," Noelle said. "She got sick." "That right. Food anxiety, I think. She hadn't eaten." Noelle glanced toward the restroom hallway. "Should I check on her?" A beat. Marco looked at Denny. Denny was already moving toward the restroom hallway without being told. That was the thing about Denny. He didn't need instructions for the logical next step. He just did it, efficiently, without expression, the way machinery moves. Noelle watched him go and counted seconds. 1, 2, 3. Diane and Santi needed 2 minutes minimum to reach the service hatch. She had bought maybe 45 seconds. She needed more. "Can I ask you something?" she said to Marco. He looked back at her, surprised by the question in the specific way that surprises people when they've already categorized you and you do something outside the category. "Sure," he said slowly. "The man who was supposed to meet her tonight, the contact she trusted." She watched his face. Was it someone from inside the organization, or did Rocco bring in someone from outside to set her up? Marco's expression didn't change, which told her everything. "Inside," she said. "Not a question now." "You don't know what you're talking about," Marco said, but he said it half a beat too late. "The treasury discrepancies she found," Noelle said. "They go back further than 6 months, don't they? And the reason nobody upstairs has found them is because the person responsible for finding them is the same person responsible for making them." Marco took a step forward. "Stop talking," he said. "Rocco Bellini runs the accounting oversight for the syndicate's legitimate businesses," she said. The words came out leveled, factual, the way she said everything when it mattered. "He's been running a parallel extraction operation for at least 2 years. Diane Marsh found it because she was outside the chain, contracted, not employed, which meant she had access to the raw transaction data without going through the filters his people put in place. He found out she was building a file because whoever she trusted enough to contact was already his." Marco had stopped moving. This was the thing about people who operated in violence. They were accustomed to being the ones who arrived with information and weaponized it. They were not accustomed to the person across from them knowing more than they had been briefed on. It created a specific kind of stillness, not calm. A disruption of the expected sequence, the way a word you know suddenly looks wrong when you stare at it long enough. "Where did you get that?" he said. "I work in this room every Thursday," she said. "I told you." From the restroom hallway, Denny's voice, calling Marco's name. One word, but with an inflection that had urgency in it. Marco didn't look away from her. "She's not in there," Denny said, arriving back. His eyes went to Noelle. Not with anger. He was past that already. With something recalibrated, more attentive. The look of a man updating a file. "How?" "Kitchen," Marco said, still watching Noelle. "She didn't go to the kitchen," Noelle said. "I told you, ladies' room, she was sick." "Yeah," Marco said. "You told me." He nodded at Denny. Denny reached inside his jacket. The room, for the second time tonight, went very quiet. But differently quiet. The first quiet had been the quiet of people pretending. This was the quiet of people who had looked up from their pretending and realized something had fundamentally changed about what kind of evening this was. Noelle saw 3 guests at the nearest table stand up simultaneously and move. Not panicked, just the efficient relocation of people whose survival instincts had outlasted their appetite for expensive lamb. And the motion created a gap between her and the eastern wall that hadn't existed a moment ago. She moved through it, not running, fast, economically fast, the difference between a sprint and something more architectural, a movement that used the furniture and the spacing of the room, the way her grandfather had taught her to use every environment. She put table 9 between herself and Denny, which meant he couldn't move directly toward her without going around it, which cost him 2 seconds, and 2 seconds was the length of a decision. She reached the main bar. Behind her, she heard Marco's voice, not loud, controlled, relaying something into a phone or earpiece, and she processed what that meant. He was reaching the cars outside, which meant whoever Diane and Santi were trying to get past was now being redirected. She needed Lucian. She had known this was coming, not this exact configuration, but the shape of it, the point at which what she'd spent 3 years carefully accumulating had to be spent. Like a person who has saved every dollar for something they haven't named yet, and then one day looks up and the thing is in front of them, and the savings either get used now or they don't get used at all. She looked up at the balcony. Lucien was there, standing, He had been sitting all evening, and now he was standing, which told her that whatever angle the security camera gave him, he had seen enough to understand that this was no longer a floor management issue. Their eyes met. Across the vaulted amber distance of the velvet lantern, across 11 years of the city's dark architecture, across every careful. Thursday she had spent moving between his tables and filing his secrets in the part of her mind that never forgot anything. Their eyes met, and Noelle held the contact for exactly the 2 seconds she could afford. Then she pointed up. Not a gesture, a direction. Come down. Then Denny's hand closed on her shoulder from behind, and the evening became something else entirely. She turned into it. The first rule her grandfather had ever taught her, before forms, before sparring, before any of the vocabulary that came after. Never move away from a hand. Move into it. You don't escape contact. You own it. She turned, and Denny's grip, designed to hold something moving away from it, found nothing to hold. Her left hand came up and redirected his forearm, same wrist, same angle as before, but this time she didn't release. She held it, stepped close, used her body's proximity to eliminate the space he needed to swing with his right. It lasted 4 seconds. Denny went down, not dramatically, not like the movies, but in the grinding, effortful way real people go down when a joint is taken to its limit, one knee first, then the other, his free hand on the floor, breathing through his teeth. She stepped back. Her shoulder hurt where he'd grabbed it. She filed that information and did not address it. Marco was across the room with his phone still at his ear, and his face in this moment was the most honest it had been all evening, stripped of the performance, the patient smile, the manufactured ease. What was underneath was not rage. It was the particular cold clarity of a man who has correctly assessed that a situation has moved entirely outside of what he was briefed on and is now operating on pure, unvarnished instinct. He said one word into the phone. She didn't hear it, but 3 minutes later she would understand what it had been. The elevator opened. Not the private elevator to the balcony. The service elevator behind the main bar, which Noelle had not seen used in 3 years, which she had assumed was decorative or decommissioned. It opened, and 2 men came out of it who were not restaurant staff and were not dinner guests and were equipped in ways that she processed in a single visual sweep that cataloged things she did not want to catalog. The dining room, what was left of it, a third of the guests having already quietly departed during the previous 10 minutes, fractured. Not chaos. The specific fractured movement of people who understand that their presence is now a liability and are moving to correct that. Noelle was standing in the center of the floor, 2 men from the elevator, feet behind her, slower now, one hand still cradling the wrist she'd bent. Marco, across the room, phone down, watching, 4 of them. Her shoulder hurt. She had 14 journals under her bathroom floor and a skill set she had spent 16 years building and a promise she had made to herself about what that skill set was for, and she was standing in the middle of a room in a waitress uniform with a hurt shoulder and 4 men who had been told. She understood this now, in the clean, cold way she understood things that she would have preferred not to, that they were not here to have a conversation. She breathed. In through the nose. 4 counts. She felt the floor under her feet, knew where the tables were, knew the distance from the bar to the nearest wall and the angle of the corridor to the kitchen and the weight of the bar stool 3 feet to her left, and whether it was bolted to the floor. It was not bolted to the floor. Her grandfather had said, in the last year of his life, sitting in his kitchen in Bridgeport with his hands around his green tea and his eyes somewhere that wasn't the kitchen. The thing I tried to give you isn't the technique. Technique is just the vocabulary. What I tried to give you is the sentence, the ability to put things together in the moment, with whatever's in front of you, in the service of what you decided to be. He'd looked at her then. Did I give you that? She hadn't known how to answer then. She thought maybe she was about to find out. The first man from the elevator moved toward her. She moved toward him. Not what he expected. She could see it in the half-second recalibration of his approach. The adjustment when a target comes at you rather than away. The fraction of a moment where the body has to revise its entire model of what's happening. She used that fraction. She went low and to the left, inside his reach. And what followed was not elegant. It was effortful and close, and involved her using his own momentum, the edge of the bar, and the geometric fact that a man his size cannot recover his balance quickly if you take his center of gravity in the right direction. And he went into the bar hard and stayed there. The second man was smarter. He hung back, circled, watched her the way people watch something they're recategorizing in real time. Denny was upright again, slower, more careful. Marco still hadn't moved from his position across the room. 3, now. And she could feel the specific weight of her shoulder. Not pain exactly, not yet, but the warning that pain was queuing up behind the adrenaline and would arrive on its own schedule. The second man came. She was mid-sequence, redirecting, using the bar stool, placing herself so that Denny couldn't approach her left side without crossing the second man's path, when she heard it. The sound from the corridor, from the direction of the loading dock. Voices. Then something louder. Then a sound that she identified with a coldness that moved through her like cold water. A door hitting a wall at the end of a short corridor, the particular resonance of metal on concrete, and then the voices again, different now, triumphant in the specific register that people use when something they were chasing has stopped running. She went still. 1 second of total stillness in the middle of the room. Marco's phone buzzed on the table where he'd set it. He glanced at the screen. Something crossed his face. Not satisfaction. Something more complex. The expression of a man who is relieved and uneasy at the same time, which was worse. He looked at Noelle. "They found your friend," he said. The loading dock. They had covered the loading dock after all. She had counted on 1 or 2 at most, had planned for the timing, had built Diane and Santi's exit around the assumption that 3 cars meant 3 exits covered with the dock the weakest. She had been wrong about something. She had miscounted, or Rocco had sent more than Santi knew about, or the timing had been off by the seconds she'd spent at the bar, staring up at Lucien on the balcony. Diane had not made it out. The bag had not made it out. 3 years of financial records. Every shell account, every wire confirmation, every proof of what Rocco Bellini had been doing to the organization's treasury for 2 years, in the hands of the people who wanted it destroyed. Noelle stood in the center of the floor and felt the specific sensation of a plan she had spent 3 years building collapse in a matter of seconds, which was a different kind of pain than the shoulder and arrived in a different place. The room was nearly empty of guests now. The last few were moving toward the main entrance with the deliberate speed of people who have learned not to run and have also learned that sometimes not running requires more courage than running. Denny and the second man had stopped, watching her. Waiting for the calculation they assumed she was doing, the calculation she saw on their faces, the place where someone who has just lost their leverage decides whether to fight or surrender or try to negotiate with something they no longer have. Marco was walking toward her now, slowly, no rush, the unhurried walk of a man whose timeline had been confirmed. "It's done," he said. "You understand? Whatever you were trying to do, it's done." Above them, the elevator, the private elevator, the balcony elevator, hummed. Everyone heard it. Marco looked up. Denny looked up. The second man, who hadn't said a single word all evening, looked up with the rest of them. The doors opened. Lucien Viscari walked out of the elevator alone. He was not what people expected when they imagined a mafia boss. He was in his mid-50s, slim, unremarkably dressed in a dark suit without a tie, hair going silver at the temples, the kind of face that would be forgettable in most contexts because it was never doing more than it needed to. He walked across the dining room floor through the wreckage of the evening. Broken glass still on the marble, tables displaced, the white peonies from table 6 scattered across the floor where someone had knocked the vase in their hurry to leave. And he walked without hurrying and without looking at anyone except Noelle. He stopped 6 feet away from her. He looked at the man against the bar, at Denny's wrist held against his body, at Marco, who had gone very still, then at her. "You've been working in my restaurant for 3 years, he said. "Yes." "You have information about my organization's finances that my own captains don't have." "Yes." "And the woman who came in tonight?" "An accountant named Diane Marsh. Rocco Bellini had her set up through a contact she trusted. The bag she was carrying contained 3 years of transaction records documenting what he's been taking from your treasury." She paused, held his eyes. "They have the bag now." Lucien's expression did not change. "How much?" he said. She told him. The number moved through him. She could see it in the way people contain things that are large, the barely perceptible tightening around the eyes, the breath that goes out and comes back shorter. He was quiet for 3 seconds. "You've known about this for how long?" he asked. "Confirmed? 3 months. Suspected? Longer." Why didn't you come to me? Because I didn't know if you were part of it, she said. And because evidence that disappears isn't evidence. I needed the records to be in someone's hands who could use them before I said a word to anyone inside this building. Lucian looked at her for a long time. And now the records are gone, he said. Yes. And Rocco has them. Yes. And you're standing in the middle of my dining room with a hurt shoulder and no leverage and 4 of my organization's men who were sent here by a captain I trusted. Yes, she said. That's correct. Another long quiet. Marco said very carefully, Mr. Viscari, Be quiet, Marco. Marco was quiet. Lucien looked at Noel and something behind his eyes moved. Not warmth, not reassurance, nothing so simple, but something that recognized something. The way a man who has spent decades reading people recognizes when the person in front of him is not what anyone in the room has been treating them as. The accountant, he said. Where is she now? Your loading dock, I think, or somewhere between there and a car. He turned to Carver, who had materialized at the elevator doors. Find her. Don't let anyone remove her from the building. He looked at Marco. Nobody leaves. Nobody calls out. He looked at Denny. Sit down. Then he looked back at Noel. The bag, he said. The records. Is there a copy? And this was the moment she had been protecting all evening. The thing underneath the thing. The reason she had stood in front of 2 armed men for a woman she didn't know. The reason she had drawn them toward her in the dining room instead of running. The reason she had let them think, Marco, Denny, all of them, that everything depended on the bag. She reached into the pocket of her waitress apron. A USB drive. Small, black, the kind that came in a 3-pack from a pharmacy. Everything that's in the bag, she said, has been on this since 6 o'clock this morning. Diane gave it to me when she called to tell me she'd be here tonight. She held it between 2 fingers. I've been carrying it all evening. Lucian looked at the drive. For the first time all night, something crossed his face that might, in different light, have been called surprised. Marco made a sound, not a word, something more fundamental than a word, the sound of a man understanding that he has been maneuvered and has not yet caught up to when or how. Noel held the drive out toward Lucian. This belongs to your organization, she said, and to every person Rocco stole from. What you do with it is your decision. She kept her eyes steady on his. But I'd suggest you make it before he finds out the bag was never the point. Lucian reached out and took the drive. His fingers were steady. So were hers. And somewhere in the building, behind the corridor, past the kitchen, in the loading dock's industrial cold, a door burst open, and Rocco Bellini's voice came through it like something that had been building for a very long time and had finally run out of walls to hold it. Rocco Bellini was not a large man. That was the first thing people got wrong about him. They expected size, the physical grammar of threat that most men in his position used as a first language. Rocco was medium everything. Medium height, medium build, medium face that arranged itself in medium expressions, and gave away exactly as much as he decided to give away and not 1 degree more. He was 53 years old and had been running Lucian Viscari's financial oversight for 11 of those years and had stolen from it for 2, and he walked through the loading dock door and into the corridor and then through the kitchen and into the dining room with the particular energy of a man who has decided that the version of this evening where he controls the narrative is the only version he is willing to inhabit. He stopped when he saw Lucian. 1 second. The recalibration was almost invisible, a microscopic adjustment in the set of his jaw, a breath that went out and came back on a slightly different rhythm. Then he walked forward again. Lucien. The voice was warm. The warmth was the most frightening thing about it, because it was practiced to a degree that had become indistinguishable from genuine. I got the call from Marco and came right down. What the hell is going on in here? Lucian said nothing. Rocco looked at Marco. At Denny, sitting where he'd been told to sit, one hand still cradling his wrist. At the man against the bar. At the scattered peonies and the broken glass and the displaced tables. His gaze moved across all of it with the practiced efficiency of a man conducting a rapid inventory of damage, and then it moved to Noel, and it stayed there. Who is this? He asked. Still warm, still the concerned captain arriving to manage a situation. She works here, Lucian said. I can see that. Rocco's eyes hadn't moved from Noel. What did she do? That's an interesting question, Lucian said. To ask first. A beat. Shorter than a heartbeat, but Noelle caught it. The place where the warmth flickered, where the practiced thing slipped 1 millimeter before it was recovered. Rocco looked at Lucian. "I'm not following you," he said. "No," Lucian said. "I don't think you are." Rocco looked at Marco again. Marco was looking at the floor. Whatever Rocco read in that, the stillness, the avoidance, the specific body language of a man who has been told to be quiet and is complying, moved through him and produced a change in his posture that was almost imperceptible. Almost. Noelle saw it. Her shoulder had settled into a dull, insistent ache that was going to be significantly worse in a few hours. She was tracking it the way you track something you can't address yet. Filed, noted, set aside. Her body was still running on the particular chemistry of controlled emergency, and she knew from experience that when it stopped running on that, the shoulder was going to make itself the center of attention. She had maybe another hour before that became a problem. She looked toward the loading dock corridor. Carver had not come back yet, which meant Diane was either still in the building or had been taken to one of the cars, and the difference between those two things was significant. "Where's the accountant?" she asked. Rocco's eyes came back to her. The warmth had restructured itself into something else, still controlled, still a performance, but the character had changed. Less concerned captain, something with more edge. "What accountant?" he said. "Diane Marsh," Noelle said, "contracted through Meridian Financial Services. She's been running external audits on your legitimate business accounts for 4 years. 8 months ago, she found something in the Treasury records that didn't reconcile. She spent 6 months building a file." She watched his face. "You found out 3 months ago. You let her build it. You needed to know how much she had, who she'd talked to, where she planned to take it. When you knew enough, you used her trust against her and arranged for tonight." The dining room was very quiet. The last 3 guests had gone. The kitchen staff, who had been visible through the pass-through window for the first hour of the evening, had disappeared, self-preservation instinct, or someone had told them to clear out. The room was its own world now, sealed and amber-lit and occupied by exactly the people who needed to be in it. Rocco smiled, not the warm smile. A different one, smaller, realer, the one that lived underneath the warm one and only came out when the audience was small enough to make the performance unnecessary. "You're a waitress," he said to Noelle. "Yes." "Who somehow knows the details of an internal financial investigation." "I work in this room every Thursday," she said, for the 3rd time tonight. Same words, different weight each time. Rocco looked at Lucian. "You're listening to a waitress." "I'm listening to someone who knows more about your operations than anyone else in this building," Lucian said, "which is a problem I'm still deciding what to do with, but not the most pressing problem." He held up the USB drive between 2 fingers. "This is the most pressing problem." Rocco looked at the drive. The small smile went away. What replaced it was not anger. She had been right about that in the dining room, that men like these moved past anger into something colder. What replaced it was the specific expression of a man who has just understood that the variable he thought he had controlled was never controlled at all, and is now doing the rapid, vicious math of what that means. "Rocco," Lucian said. His voice had changed, not louder, never louder, but with a quality underneath it that Noelle had never heard in 3 years of Thursday nights. Something iron. Something that had been there all along, patient, and had just decided to stop being patient. "How much?" Rocco said nothing. "How much?" Lucian said again. Silence. Then, from the loading dock corridor, Carver's voice, and another voice she recognized, and the sound of people moving through a space toward the light. Carver came through the kitchen doors first. Behind him, Diane Marsh, her coat torn at the shoulder, her hair out of whatever arrangement it had started the evening in, the messenger bag clutched against her chest with both arms in the way of someone who has had it taken from them and has gotten it back and is not releasing it again for any reason. Behind Diane, Santi. His lip was split. He'd gotten the split lip in the loading dock, Noelle guessed, when Rocco's men found them, the consequence of being a 22-year-old who had made a choice in a corridor and then had to live in the body of that choice for the next 20 minutes. He was holding his head up. That meant something. Behind Santi, 2 men she didn't recognize, Carver's people, not Rocco's, the distinction visible in the way they moved and where they positioned themselves when they stopped. Diane came into the dining room and saw Lucian and stopped walking. She looked at Noelle. Noelle looked back. Diane's eyes did the complicated thing again, the multiple messages at once. But the composition was different now. Less fear. Something that was not yet relief but was in the same direction. She has the bag, Carver said to Lucian. 2 of Bellini's men had her at the dock. They're outside. Keep them there, Lucian said. Carver nodded. Stepped back. Rocco had not moved. Had not looked at Diane when she came in. He was still looking at the USB drive in Lucian's hand with the focused, undecorated attention of someone who is past performing and is now simply thinking. Calculating. Moving through the variables with the speed of a man who has survived 53 years in an environment that did not forgive errors by being slow. It's not what she says it is, Rocco said finally. No? She's misread the data. The accounts she flagged are structured the way they are for legal protection, tax positioning, asset shielding. It's all sanctioned. I have documentation. I'm sure you do, Lucian said. The numbers she's built a case around, they're explained, every one of them. Rocco. It's a misunderstanding that anyone with proper accounting, Rocco. The iron thing again, closer to the surface. Stop. Rocco stopped. The room breathed. Lucian looked at him for a long moment, not with hatred, Noelle noted, not with betrayal in the theatrical sense, with something more exhausted than either of those. The look of a man who has led something for a very long time and has just found a crack in the foundation that has been there, growing, while he was occupied with the structure above it. 11 years, Lucian said. Rocco said nothing. I gave you 11 years, Lucian said. I gave you my books. I gave you the accounts and the structures and the access that nobody else in this organization has. Because I trusted you. He paused. When did you start? A long silence. 2 years ago, Rocco said. And then, which surprised her. Almost exactly. The honesty of it, the sudden dropping of the scaffolding, was more disturbing than the lies had been. Like watching someone take off a coat and realize the person underneath was someone you didn't know at all. Why? Lucian said. Rocco looked at him. Because I've been running your money for 11 years and I'm not the one with a balcony. The silence that followed had a different quality from all the silences before it. Something almost architectural, solid. Noelle felt her shoulder pulse. Felt her own breathing, which had been controlled all evening, catch slightly on the inhale. She had not expected honesty. Honesty changed the geometry of the room. It removed certain covers, certain predictabilities. A man who was still performing was a man following a script. A man who had stopped performing was unpredictable in ways that a script could not account for. She looked at Marco. Marco was still looking at the floor. She looked at Denny. Denny was looking at Rocco. She looked at Santi. Santi was looking at her. She moved her eyes to the gap between the bar and the nearest table, which was currently unoccupied by anyone, and back to him. A fraction of a movement, the smallest possible communication. He understood it. She saw him understand it in the micro-adjustment of his posture, a small shift away from the center of the room toward the periphery. Good. Rocco reached inside his jacket. Everything in the room moved at once. Carver's hand went to his own jacket. Marco stood up from the chair he'd been told to stay in. Denny got to his feet. Lucien did not move, did not flinch, did not step back, stood exactly where he was, as if the room's physics didn't apply to him, which was either the composure of a man who had been in too many rooms like this to be startled or something very close to recklessness, and Noelle had never been able to tell those two things apart from the outside. Rocco's hand came out holding a phone. He held it up, screen facing out. 14 accounts, he said. 14 accounts across 6 shell structures. All of it transferable with one authorization in the next. He glanced at the screen. 4 minutes. The math was immediate and visible on everyone's face. You take me in tonight, Rocco said, looking at Lucien. Every cent that's sitting in those accounts moves to a destination that has nothing to do with this organization. I disappear along with it, and so does everything I know about the last 11 years. He turned the phone screen back toward himself. Or I make a call, the transfers reverse, the money comes home, and I walk out of here, tonight, with whatever head start we can agree on. Lucien looked at the phone. Noelle looked at Carver. Carver's face was doing the calculation. She could see it. The professional assessment of a man whose entire function was preventing situations like this one, running the options and finding that the options had been deliberately eliminated by someone who understood the room. Rocco had planned for this. Not for tonight specifically, not for the USB drive, not for the waitress, not for Diane walking in with the bag, but for the failure mode. He had built himself an exit in the event that things went wrong, and things had gone wrong, and the exit was a phone in his hand and 4 minutes on a clock. "You won't make it out of Chicago," Lucian said. "I don't need to make it out of Chicago," Rocco said. "I need to make it out of this room. The rest I've had 2 years to figure out." 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Noelle looked at Diane. Diane was frozen, the messenger bag against her chest, eyes on the phone in Rocco's hand, working through something that her accountant's mind was processing faster than anyone else in the room. The accounts. The structures. She'd spent 6 months inside those numbers, and she knew them the way you know things you've stared at until they become part of your internal geography. "The authorization code," Diane said. Everyone looked at her. She said it again, to Rocco directly. "The authorization code for the transfers. You're the originating account holder on the shell structure, which means you need a 2-factor verification. Your phone is 1 factor. What's the second?" Rocco looked at her. "It's biometric," Diane said. Not asking, figuring out loud the way people talk when they're moving fast through something they know. "Fingerprint or retina. Because you're the only person who set it up, and you needed it to be something you couldn't be forced to give up." She stopped. "Fingerprint. Right hand. You've had that phone for at least a year, which means you've used that verification protocol long enough to make it habit. And when you reached inside your jacket just now, you reached with your right hand even though you carry things on your left." Rocco said nothing. "Which means," she said, "the transfer doesn't happen if you don't use that finger." The room had gone so quiet that Noelle could hear the ventilation system, 3 floors up, its distant mechanical breathing. Rocco looked at Diane for a long time. "You're very smart," he said. The warmth was entirely gone. What was left was almost respectful, the acknowledgement of one competent person for another, stripped of every other context. "You should have been smarter 6 months earlier and never built the file." "I know," she said. "I've had a long evening to think about that." 2 minutes 50 seconds. Noelle moved, not toward Rocco, toward the table to her left, specifically toward the surface of it, and what she picked up was not a weapon. It was a table number placard, small, metallic, the kind of thing that exists in 100 upscale restaurants in Chicago and is invisible because it is so comprehensively ordinary. She held it at her side and she moved 3 steps to her left, and she did it with the same quality of motion she'd used all evening, unhurried, economical, the motion of a woman who was simply repositioning herself and had no particular agenda about where she ended up. She ended up between Rocco and the corridor that led to the kitchen. He noticed. His eyes came to her with the quality of attention she'd first seen from him when he came through the door, the flat, recalibrating kind. "Step back," he said to her. "I'm just standing here," she said. "Step back." "You have 2.5 minutes," she said, "and you need your right hand, and there are—" She glanced at Carver, at his people, at the room. 6 people between you and any door. "I only need to get to 1 door." "Which one?" He didn't answer. "Because the front entrance has your cars outside," she said. "But Carver's people are with them now, and you can't call the cars without using your right hand, and if you use your right hand, the window closes." She tilted her head slightly. "The kitchen is behind me. The service elevator is back at the bar. The loading dock is the way you came in, and Carver just came from there." She held his gaze. "So." His jaw tightened. 2 minutes 10. "Marco," Rocco said. Marco didn't move. "Marco." Sharper. "He told me to stay where I was," Marco said. Quietly. "To the floor." Something crossed Rocco's face, the first genuine emotion she'd seen from him all evening. Not rage. Something more corrosive. The feeling of a man watching something he built, loyalty, structure, years of careful cultivation, choose a different gravity in the moment he needed it most. He looked at Denny. Denny was looking at Lucian. "He protected you," Noelle said, quietly. "Not to the room. To Rocco. For 11 years. You decided a balcony was worth more than that." "Don't," he said. "I'm not judging it," she said. "I'm telling you that the people in this room know the difference between what you built and what you took, and they've made their choice. 1 minute 40. Rocco looked at the phone, then at the room, then at his right hand. She saw the decision happen, not in his face, in his shoulder. The drop of one shoulder, almost imperceptible. The physical grammar of a man who has found the last variable and assigned it a value and is moving. He moved toward her. Not to get past her, she understood this in the split second before it happened. He wasn't running for the corridor. I was coming for her specifically because she was the thing in the room that had undone everything else, and he needed her out of the way, or he needed her as something to move people with. And he had 1 minute 30, and he had made his calculation. He was fast. She hadn't expected him to be fast. Medium build, 53, the body of a man who ran finances rather than operations. But he crossed the distance between them in the time it took the room to register what was happening, and he had his right arm, phone hand, verification hand, behind her before she fully turned into it. She felt the phone case against her side. She felt his left arm come across her collarbone. Her shoulder, the injured one, detonated. The pain was white and total, and she processed it the way her grandfather had taught her to process pain, which was not by ignoring it, but by treating it as information. Your left side is compromised. Redistribute, adjust, use the right. She felt the room tilt, not literally, the specific subjective tilt of acute pain in a body that is trying to keep functioning. And she planted her feet and she breathed through it, in and out, 4 counts, and she stayed up. Nobody moves, Rocco said. To the room, his arm across her collarbone, the phone behind her, his body close enough that she could feel the tension in him, the tight wire tension of a man with a plan and a clock and 1 minute 15. Nobody moved. Lucien stood 12 feet away with the USB drive still in his hand and looked at Rocco with the particular stillness of a man who is thinking faster than he is showing. "Let me walk to the door," Rocco said. "That's all?" "I walk out. I make the call from outside and the money reverses and you never hear from me again." "You'll make the call," Lucien said, "and walk." "Yes. And what you know about 11 years of my operations walks with you. It's not useful to me if I'm gone. It's insurance. If I'm gone, there's no reason to use it." 1 minute, Noelle breathed. Her shoulder was a sustained, burning wrongness that occupied the left side of her body from her neck to her elbow, and she was breathing through it in the cadenced, deliberate way. And she was feeling the floor under her feet, and knowing where the tables were and feeling the specific geometry of Rocco's hold, left arm across her collarbone, right arm behind her with the phone, his body weight distributed slightly to the forward foot, his head 6 inches above hers and angled to see over her toward the room. Her grandfather had a hold for this. He had holds for most things. What made them useful was not that they were sophisticated. Most of them weren't. Most of them were simple past the point of elegance. But that they were designed for real conditions, which meant they accounted for pain and fatigue and the compromised biomechanics of a person who was not in ideal condition. "You will not always be at your best," he had said. "The technique has to work when you are at your worst. Otherwise, it is not technique, it is performance." She was at her worst. She dropped her weight. Not a lot, 4 inches maybe. The drop of a person who has stopped holding themselves up. Rocco's arm across her collarbone followed the drop, which meant his weight shifted forward, which meant his forward foot was bearing more load than his back foot, which meant his back foot was light. She drove her right elbow back, not into his ribs, into the inside of his right elbow, the joint, the specific angle that made the arm fold rather than resist. The phone hand, the verification hand. His arm folded. She turned. Her left side screamed. She turned anyway, into his body, close enough that his reach was worthless, and she got both hands on his right wrist, right hand on his right wrist, and she used the rotation of her own body and the forward momentum he'd been holding, and she bent his wrist to the angle that Denny's wrist had seen earlier in the evening, but further, and Rocco made a sound that was not a word, and the phone left his hand. 40 seconds. The phone hit the floor. Noelle went down with it. Her shoulder gave on the way, the pain arriving in a wave that narrowed her vision at the edges. And she got her hand on the phone and she slid it across the marble floor toward Lucien's feet, and she stayed on one knee on the floor with her left arm pulled against her body and breathed. Lucien picked up the phone. 30 seconds. Rocco straightened. His wrist was bent, not broken. His face had lost everything, the warmth, the coldness, the calculation. What was left was the bare thing underneath all of it, The human thing, 53 years old and standing in a room that had stopped belonging to him and facing the specific arithmetic of what that meant. 20 seconds. Lucian looked at the phone, at the screen, at the transfer authorization prompt that was waiting, biometric verification required, timer running. He looked at Rocco. The account numbers, he said. All 14, right now. 10 seconds. Rocco. Rocco looked at the floor. The accounts, or it times out and we take what's on the drive and you take whatever comes next. Lucian's voice was iron all the way through now, no surface left on it at all. 5 seconds. Rocco looked up. His face, when he spoke, was the face of a man arriving somewhere he has been avoiding for a very long time, and the arrival, after all the avoidance, was almost a relief. Almost. 471, he began. He gave the numbers. Lucian entered them. The phone confirmed. The transfers reversed. 14 accounts, 6 shell structures, 2 years of careful extraction, returning, digit by digit, to where it had come from, and Noelle, still on one knee on the marble floor of the velvet lantern, with her left arm against her body and her right hand flat on the floor, and her breathing slowly returning to something that didn't require active management, watched it happen and thought of nothing in particular and everything at once. Carver moved to Rocco. Rocco led him. Marco was still in his chair. Denny was sitting again. Santi had moved to the wall near the bar the way she'd indicated, and he was standing there with his split lip and his hands in his pockets, and the face of someone who has aged approximately 3 years in one evening. Lucian closed out the phone. He looked at Noelle. She looked back up at him from the floor. "You need a doctor," he said. "Probably," she said. The word came out rougher than she intended. Her shoulder was doing what she'd known it would do when the adrenaline finished its business, which was making itself impossible to ignore. "Can you stand?" She stood. It cost her. She did it without help because she had gotten this far without help, and the last foot of any distance you've been covering is not the place to change your method, and she was upright when Diane appeared at her side and put a hand on her arm, the right arm, the good side, careful. And Noelle looked at her and said nothing because there was nothing that needed saying yet. Lucien was still looking at her. 3 years, he said. Yes. Building that. He gestured, minimally, a lift of the chin toward the drive and the phone and the space the whole evening had occupied. Yes. Why didn't you go to the police? I thought about it, she said, but the police can be reached. The records could be buried. The people who could bury them. She looked at him. I needed someone with more to lose than anyone in Rocco's pocket. I needed someone who would act on it completely, not partially. You needed me. I needed someone who ran this organization, she said, who it turned out to be was going to determine what I did with what I had. And if it had been me stealing, she said nothing. He understood the nothing. What happens now is my decision, he said. Yes, she said. It is. And you're comfortable with that. She looked at him for a moment, at the man who had built an empire on things she could not entirely defend, and had also, tonight, when given information and a choice, chosen the direction she had gambled everything on him choosing. I'm comfortable with it tonight, she said. Ask me again tomorrow. Something crossed his face that she had not seen there before. Not a smile exactly. Something adjacent to a smile. The expression of a man who has encountered something he did not expect and has decided he is not displeased by the encounter. He looked at Carver. Get her a doctor, he said, and get me Breslin. I want the front secured before anyone from Rocco's cars makes a call we can't take back. Carver moved. Diane's hand was still on Noelle's arm. The bag was still against Diane's chest. The messenger bag that had never been the point, that had been the visible thing, the thing everyone in the room had been watching while the real thing sat in an apron pocket all evening. Noelle let herself be walked to a chair. She sat down. The dining room was ruined, flowers everywhere, glass, displaced furniture, the wreckage of a Thursday night that had not gone the way any particular person in it had planned. The amber light was the same. The vaulted ceiling was the same. The white marble floor scattered with petals and broken things was the same floor she had walked 600 Thursday evenings. She looked at her hands, steady. That surprised her, a little. Not the steadiness, she had trained for steadiness. What surprised her was that it was still there, after all of it. After the shoulder and the floor and the decision she'd made at the bar station with a water pitcher, the one that had set every subsequent thing in motion. Her hands were as steady as they'd been when the evening started. She thought about her grandfather. She thought, I think I have an answer to your question now. Above her, the balcony was empty. Lucien had descended and was standing across the room with Carver and two other men, his back to her, and the conversation they were having was the kind of conversation that would continue long after tonight, that would have consequences she could not fully map, that belonged to a world she had moved through for 3 years without belonging to it. The door to the corridor opened. Breslin came in. And 2 steps behind Breslin, carrying the specific energy of someone who has been waiting in a car on West Huron Street for 40 minutes, and has just been told they can come in, was Detective Hannah Yoon. She stopped when she saw the room. Took it in, the damage, the people, Rocco in Carver's custody near the bar, the USB drive in Lucien Vescari's hand, the accountant with the messenger bag, the waitress sitting in a chair with her left arm held against her body. She looked at Noel. Noel looked back. You could have called me, Hannah said. I needed the accounts reversed first, Noel said. You can't reverse a wire transfer with a warrant. It takes too long. And now? Now, Noel said. You can have everything on that drive and a full confession from the man Carver is holding. She paused. And the accountant who built the original case, and probably a 22-year-old named Santi who is standing by the bar and has had a very educational evening and might be interested in discussing his options. Hannah was quiet for a moment. She looked at the room again, at Lucien Vescari, who had not turned around. He knows I'm here, she said. He knew before tonight that you existed, Noel said. He made his calculation. And what calculation was that? Noel looked at the back of Lucien's head, at the silver in his hair, at the way he stood, straight, unhurried, the posture of a man who had decided something and was waiting for the world to catch up to the decision. That some things, she said, cost more than they're worth. Hannah studied her. Are you going to need a statement from him? Noel asked. From Vescari. Hannah said it with the specific flatness of a detective processing something she'll be writing reports about for the next 6 months. From Vescari, Noel confirmed. Another silence. I'm going to need statements from everyone in this room, Hannah said. I know, Noel said. Start with Diane. She's had the hardest night. Hannah looked at her for one more moment, the look of a woman who had approached her twice in 3 years and been turned away, and who was now standing in the wreckage of whatever those 3 years had been building toward, assembling the picture piece by piece. Next time, Hannah said, you call me. Noel said nothing. Her shoulder pulsed, her hands were steady. And across the room, Rocco Bellini, medium height, medium build, medium face, sat very still and waited for whatever came next, and the warmth was gone from him entirely, and what was left was the face he'd always had underneath it, which was simply the face of a man who had wanted more than he was given and had taken it and had now arrived at the end of that particular road, and it looked, in the end, very much like every other end. The doctor arrived at 11:47. He was a compact man in his 60s named Ferris, who carried a black bag and had the unhurried manner of someone who had been called to rooms like this one before and had long since made his peace with not asking questions whose answers he didn't need. He came through the kitchen entrance with Carver, looked at the dining room with the same expression a plumber might use to assess a flooded basement, professional, calibrating, unmoved by the drama of it, and then looked at Noel. Left shoulder, she said, before he could ask. He set his bag on the nearest table and she sat, and he examined her with hands that were efficient and impersonal, and occasionally produced a specific quality of pain that she managed by looking at the wall behind him and breathing in the counted way and saying nothing. Partial dislocation, he said. It went back on its own when you moved. That's good and bad. I know, she said. The good is obvious. The bad is the tissue around the joint has been... I know, she said again. He looked at her. You've done this before. Same shoulder, 7 years ago. He made a sound that was not quite disapproval and opened his bag. It'll need imaging, tonight, not tomorrow. Tomorrow, she said. He looked at her again, decided not to argue. He had the look of a man who had learned that certain people and their decisions were not improved by arguing. Across the room, Hannah Yoon had set up what could generously be called an interview station at the far end of the bar. A stool for witnesses, a legal pad, the small digital recorder she carried in her jacket pocket. and was working through the room with the methodical patience of a detective who has found herself at the center of something much larger than a Thursday night call and is managing that fact by treating it exactly like every other Thursday night call, which was how you managed things that were too large to look at directly. Diane was first. She sat on the stool with the messenger bag on the bar beside her and talked for 40 minutes, and Noelle could not hear the specific words from where she sat, but she could read the shape of the conversation in Diane's body, the initial tightness, the gradual releasing of something that had been held at enormous cost, the specific physical relief of a person who has been carrying a thing alone for a very long time and has finally found somewhere to set it down. Santi was second. He sat with his hands between his knees and spoke in the quiet, direct way of someone who had made a decision and was going to live inside it. Hannah asked him something, and he answered without hesitation, and then asked something back, and Hannah wrote something on her pad, and the conversation that followed was longer than Noelle had anticipated. Whatever Santi knew about Rocco's operations, whatever a 22-year-old brought along as a witness, had absorbed in his time inside that particular circle. It was apparently substantial enough to take time. Dr. Ferris wrapped her shoulder. Not a sling, a compression wrap, tight and stabilizing, with instructions she was not going to follow about rest and ice, and the mandatory imaging she was going to postpone until she had finished what still needed finishing. She thanked him. He packed his bag. He left without asking for payment, which told her something about his relationship to the organization, and she filed it in the part of her that would always be filing things, the part that had never learned to turn off. Rocco was seated at table 3. Carver's 2 men flanked him, one standing, one at the adjacent table. Rocco sat with his hands flat on the white linen, the fresh linen, the 4th set of the evening, because the Velvet Lantern had changed its table linens between every course, even on the worst nights. And apparently this habit persisted through organizational crises. And he looked at nothing in particular with the expression of a man who has crossed to the other side of something and is still processing the terrain. Noelle walked to his table. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat. He looked at her. She looked back. "You're going to want something from me," he said. Not hostile, observational. The voice of a man who had spent 11 years understanding what people wanted from rooms they walked into. "No," she said. That surprised him. She saw it. A small reorganization around the eyes, brief. "Then why are you sitting there?" "Because I spent 3 years in this building collecting information about a theft you committed, and tonight I watched you give it back, and I wanted to see what that looked like on you." He was quiet for a moment. "And?" "And nothing," she said. "I just wanted to see it." He looked at his hands on the linen. "You could have done this differently. You had the drive. You had the accountant. You could have gone to the police 6 months ago. The wire transfers would have taken weeks to reverse through legal channels," she said. "If they reversed at all. Money that moves through 14 shell accounts across 3 jurisdictions has a way of becoming very hard to find once people know someone is looking. So you needed Lucien." "I needed someone with the access and the authority to reverse it in 4 minutes," she said. "Lucien was the only person in the city who could do that. And you trusted him to." She said nothing. "Based on what?" Rocco pressed. Not aggressively, with genuine curiosity, the kind that surfaces in a man when he has nothing left to protect and can finally ask the questions he actually has. "You spent 3 years watching this organization. You know what it is, what it does, what it's built on. And you handed the most important thing you had to the man who runs it in a room full of his people on the gamble that he'd use it the way you needed him to." "I handed it to him because the money he lost was his," she said. "Because a man who has built something over decades has a different relationship to having it stolen from than a man who simply wants to own a thing. And because," she paused, "because in 3 years of Thursday nights, I never once saw him use his power against someone who hadn't come for him first." Rocco absorbed this. "That's a thin basis," he said. "Most decisions are," she said. He looked at her for a long time. Long enough that the quality of the look changed, stopped being assessment, became something else. Something that in a different context between different people might have been called respect. Not admiration. Not liking. The specific, unadorned acknowledgement of one person who knows what it costs to do a difficult thing for a person who knows the cost of a different difficult thing. "I've been in this organization since I was 31, he said. "I built the financial infrastructure that kept it from collapsing 3 times in 11 years. I designed structures that protected 40 families who depended on the legitimate side of these businesses. He turned one hand over on the linen, palm up, then back down. And then I started moving money because I wanted the balcony. He said it without self-pity, as a fact. The way you state a fact you've been avoiding for 2 years and have finally decided to just say out loud. Did you get it? Noelle asked. He looked at her. Was it worth it? She said. In the 2 years. Whatever you had, whatever you built with what you took, did it feel like the balcony? He said nothing for a long moment. No, he said finally. It felt like waiting to get caught. She nodded. She stood up. I'm sorry about your shoulder, he said. She paused. He was looking at his hands again. I didn't intend to. I needed to get out of the room. I wasn't thinking about what it would. He stopped. I know that doesn't change anything. She looked at him. No, she said. It doesn't. She walked away from the table. Her shoulder pulsed through the wrap. She breathed through it. Lucien was standing near the private elevator, talking to Carver in the low, continuous way of men who have a great deal of logistics to manage and are managing them with the efficiency of people who have done this kind of damage control before, which they had. She crossed the room toward him, and he saw her coming and said something to Carver that ended the conversation, and Carver moved away. She stopped 3 feet from him. Detective Yoon is going to want to talk to you, she said. I know. Tonight, not tomorrow. I know that too. He looked at her shoulder, the wrap visible above the collar of her uniform. How bad? Manageable. That's not what I asked. Partial dislocation, old injury. It'll be fine. He nodded once, then looked at her with the look that had been on his face since he first used her name. The evaluating look, except it was different now. Less calculation, more the expression of a man who has arrived at a conclusion after a long examination and is deciding what to do with it. You've been building this for 3 years, he said. Yes. In my restaurant. Yes. And your plan the whole time was to need me at the end of it. My plan the whole time was to reach a moment where the right person had what they needed to make the right decision, she said. I hoped you'd be the right person. I planned for contingencies in case you weren't. What were the contingencies? She looked at him. The drive had a timed upload scheduled for 6 a.m. to 3 separate secure servers, one of which was Detective Yoon's professional email. If I hadn't manually canceled it by midnight, it went automatically. He was quiet. Did you cancel it? He asked. 40 minutes ago, she said, when Diane confirmed the transfers had reversed. Something moved across his face. So if I'd made a different decision tonight, you would have woken up tomorrow in a very different situation, she said. Yes. He looked at her for a long time. You're a careful person, he said. My grandfather was a careful person, she said. He taught me. The martial arts instructor. She went still. One small beat of surprise that she didn't fully suppress. I've known who you are for 2 years, he said. Not apologetic, just matter of fact. Once I started watching you, I had someone look into your background. James Mercer, 27 years teaching out of Bridgeport, competed nationally until his knees gave out, trained 3 students who went professional. A pause. Died 14 months before you started working here. She said nothing. You took this job after he died, Lucien said. Yes. Why here? Why this place specifically? She thought about how to answer that. It was the question she had been asking herself for 3 years. The question that had a clean surface answer and a different answer underneath it. And she had spent most of those 3 years being honest with herself about which one was true. Because he was the most careful man I ever knew, she said. And he spent his whole life teaching people to protect themselves and other people. And he died in a hospital surrounded by machines while the people who ran the organization that owned the building where his studio was, the building they forced him to close 3 years before he died because they decided they wanted the space, were having dinner in nice restaurants. She looked at Lucien's face. Not this restaurant. A different one. Different organization, but the same dinner. Lucien said nothing. I didn't come here for revenge, she said. I want you to understand that. I'm not interested in revenge. Revenge is... She shook her head. It doesn't give anything back. I came here because I had a skill set and a set of tools, and I needed to go somewhere they would be useful. And places like this one are full of the kind of harm that doesn't get addressed by conventional means. And I thought I could do something that actually... She stopped. That actually changed something. not just documented it. And tonight, he said, did it change something? She thought about Diane on the interview stool, her body releasing months of held weight, about Santi with his split lip and his decision, about the 14 accounts, the numbers reversing, the money going back. Tonight changed tonight, she said. What comes after is yours. He looked at her steadily. That's an honest answer. I try. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that exists between people who have said what needed saying and are letting it stand without adding to it. Hana Yun, he said finally. Yes. She's going to want cooperation from this organization that goes beyond tonight. Probably. And you think I should give it to her? Noel looked at him. I think you should talk to her and then make whatever decision you make. I told you in the dining room, what comes after tonight is yours. I meant it. You're not going to advocate. I'm a waitress, she said. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. The echo of one, the place a smile had passed through recently. You are the least convincing waitress I have ever employed, he said. She said nothing. You'll be back Thursday, he said. Not a question. Not exactly an instruction either. Something that occupied the ambiguous space between a statement of fact and a request, which was how, she suspected, Lucien Viscari said most things he actually wanted. She thought about it. Thursday, she said. She walked to the bar station and picked up her order pad, where she had set it down hours ago, a different version of the evening ago, and she put it in her apron pocket next to the space where the USB drive had been. And she walked to the coat hook by the kitchen entrance and took her coat, and she put it on carefully, left arm first, the way Dr. Ferris had shown her, and she buttoned it with one hand. Hana caught her at the kitchen door. I need a full statement, Hana said. Tonight. I know, I'll come to the precinct in the morning. Noel. Diane has everything you need to start moving tonight, she said. The drive has 14 account structures, 2 years of transaction records, and enough documentation of Bellini's shell company architecture to keep your financial crimes unit occupied for 6 months. Santi can give you the operational side. You don't need me tonight. Hana looked at her with the expression she had probably been developing over the 3 years of twice-declined approaches, something between professional frustration and the grudging acknowledgement of a woman who respected what she was looking at even when it made her job harder. Why didn't you call me? Hana asked. Not for the first time tonight, but differently. Not the tactical question of earlier, the real one, the personal one. Noel looked at her. Because what I was building needed to work, she said. Not just get filed, not just get documented and entered into evidence and run through a system that has... She stopped, chose her words. That has relationships with the things it's supposed to be opposing. I needed it to actually work. The money needed to actually go back. The evidence needed to be unimpeachable and complete before anyone who might want to make it disappear knew it existed. She met Hana's eyes. If I'd called you 6 months ago, or a year ago, and it had leaked, and it would have leaked, Hana, somewhere in the chain it would have found its way back to Rocco, and he would have moved the money and burned the trail, and Diane Marsh would not have a daughter who still has a mother tonight. A long quiet. You don't trust the department, Hana said. I trust you, Noel said. I didn't trust the process. Hana absorbed this with the face of a woman who has spent enough years inside the process to know that the distinction is not always wrong. Morning, Hana said finally. Morning, Noel said. She went through the kitchen doors. The kitchen was empty now. The staff had been sent home at some point during the evening. She wasn't sure when, and the stainless surfaces were wiped and the lights over the line had been dimmed to the low-maintenance setting that hummed faintly in the otherwise complete quiet. The heat was still there, residual, the memory of a full-service evening embedded in the metal and concrete of the space. She walked through it alone, past the cold station, past the dry storage corridor, through the door that led to the loading dock, where the overhead lamp was still on, and the rubber bumpers still lined the dock, and the 2 pallets of linen supplies stood against the far wall, exactly where they'd been 2 hours ago when she'd come through here with a frightened woman and a plan that was about to stop working. She pushed through the service door. The alley was cold, Chicago in November cold, the absolute unambiguous cold of a city that had decided the performance of autumn was finished and was now simply itself. It hit her in the face and she let it, welcomed it, almost, the way you welcome something clean after something that has been the opposite of clean for several hours. She stood for a moment. The alley was empty. Whatever cars had been here were gone. The city made its distant city sounds. A train somewhere, a horn on Michigan Avenue, the particular low-frequency hum of a million people existing in proximity to each other, most of them unaware that a few blocks away, in an underground restaurant they'd never heard of, something had shifted in the arrangement of power and money that underpinned the part of the city they'd also never heard of. She started walking. The walk from the Velvet Lantern to her apartment in Pilsen was 47 minutes on foot. She had done it before, late nights when the trains felt like too much. She would do it tonight because she needed the 47 minutes, needed the cold air, and the movement, and the specific quality of time that walking through a night city gives you, the time that is yours in a way that no other kind of time is quite yours. She was 20 minutes in, on the bridge over the river where the wind off the water was punishing and spectacular, when her phone vibrated. Diane. She answered. "I'm at the precinct," Diane said. Her voice was the voice of someone who had been talking for a long time and was tired in the specific way that has nothing to do with sleep. It's a lot. They're very thorough." "That's good," Noelle said. "I wanted to—" A pause. "I don't know what I wanted to say. Thank you seems—" Another pause. "It seems like the wrong size for what happened." "It's the right size," Noelle said. "It's the right size for anything." A moment of quiet on the line. "My daughter's name is Clara," Diane said. "She's 9 and she's obsessed with marine biology, and she wants to name every fish in the ocean." Her voice did the thing that people's voices do when they say the names of the people they love. A slight change in texture, as if the name itself has physical weight that the voice has to adjust to carry. I wanted you to know that. Her name." Noelle looked at the river, the black water moving below the bridge, catching the city's light in pieces. "Clara's a good name," she said. "Yeah," Diane said. "It is." They stayed on the line for a moment without speaking, the comfortable silence of two people who have been through something together that has no language adequate to it and have decided not to try. "Get some sleep," Noelle said, "after they're done with you." "You too," Diane said. "Your shoulder." "I know. The imaging, but—" "I know, Diane." "Okay." A breath. "Okay. Good night, Noelle." She hung up. Noelle put the phone in her coat pocket and stood on the bridge for another minute and let the wind do what wind does over water in November in Chicago, which is remind you of the size of things. Then she walked home. Mrs. Kowalski's lights were off. The building was quiet. She climbed the stairs to her apartment on the 3rd floor and unlocked the door and went inside and turned on the lamp by the window, not the overhead. The overhead was too much for this particular end of this particular evening, and she stood in the small space of her apartment and let herself feel the specific weight of the hours just past. The shoulder was a sustained presence now, the adrenaline completely finished, the injury honest and insistent in the way that injuries are when they no longer have competition for more urgent things. She would get the imaging. Tomorrow. She promised herself that with the same flat, unkept relationship to self-promises that she suspected everyone had, and then she went to the bathroom and ran the water hot and stood under it for 12 minutes and let the heat work on the things that heat could work on. She put on the clothes she wore when she wasn't anything in particular, soft pants, an old sweatshirt that had belonged to her grandfather, faded past any legible text on its front, soft in the specific way that only years of washing can produce. And she went to the kitchen and made tea the way he had made it. Loose leaf, cast iron pot, water not quite boiling, 4 minutes of steep. She sat at her kitchen table. She had a kitchen table and 2 chairs. She had always had 2 chairs, had bought 2 chairs when she moved in, though she ate alone, because her grandfather had always had 2 chairs at his kitchen table, and she had sat in the second one for most of her childhood, and the chair had never felt like absence to her. It had felt like the shape of a particular kind of love that stayed in the space it had occupied even after the person was gone. She put her hands around the cup. She thought about what Lucien had said, that he had known who she was for 2 years, that he had looked into her background, found her grandfather, traced the line from James Mercer's studio in Bridgeport to the Velvet Lantern on West Huron, that he had watched her work in his restaurant with the knowledge of what she was, and had never said anything, never moved against her, never adjusted the terms. She thought about what that meant. It meant he had made his own calculation 2 years ago, and the calculation had reached a conclusion he'd kept to himself. A conclusion she could not fully know, even now. Maybe he had seen her as an insurance policy, an outside observer with no organizational loyalties who might eventually surface something he couldn't surface himself. Maybe he had simply found her interesting enough not to remove, which in Lucien Viscari's world was its own kind of approval. Maybe both. Maybe something else that she didn't have the data to infer. She would probably never know. She was comfortable with that. She had been trained to be comfortable with incomplete information. Her grandfather had always said that the need for complete information before acting was how people convinced themselves not to act at all, which was usually the thing they wanted to convince themselves of in the first place. She drank her tea. She thought about Santi, 22 years old with a split lip and a decision. She hoped Hana would handle him the way good detectives handled young people who had made one choice well after a chain of worse ones, with the understanding that the one good choice was worth more than the accumulated weight of what came before, and with the offer of a different direction that had real terms attached to it. She thought he would take it. She had seen something in him at the end of the corridor when he turned around with his hands away from his body, something that had been waiting for an opportunity to be something else. Most people had that. Most people who ended up in places like Rocco's orbit were there because the orbit had offered something and the alternatives had offered less. And that was a math problem more than a moral one. And math problems, unlike some other problems, could be revised when the variables changed. She finished the tea. She went to the bathroom cabinet and found the anti-inflammatories she kept there for exactly this kind of damage, and took 2 with a glass of water and then went to her bedroom and set her phone on the nightstand and lay down on her back with her shoulder at the angle that hurt least, which was not a comfortable angle for sleeping but was the angle available, and she looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was plain white. She had never decorated it. She had never decorated much of the apartment. It was the apartment of someone who lived inside their own head more than their own home, which she had accepted as a feature of herself rather than a problem with the apartment. She thought about the journals. 14 of them, in the waterproof box under the bathroom floor. 3 years of what she had seen, stripped of what she felt. Tomorrow or the day after, when things had settled into whatever new shape they would settle into, she was going to have to decide what to do with them. Whether Hana needed them, some of what they contained was relevant to the investigation, some of it was background that contextualized things the formal records would establish. She would go through them. She would figure out what was useful and what was hers. The rest, she thought, she might burn, not out of secrecy, out of completion. The journals had been a tool for a specific purpose, and the purpose was done. And some tools you kept and some you retired. And she thought these were the retiring kind. She thought about Thursday. She had told Lucy on Thursday. She wasn't entirely sure why. She had said it without deciding to say it, which was unusual for her. And she had been turning it over since. The spontaneous commitment, the way it had come out of her before the calculating part had weighed it. Maybe because the restaurant had been hers in some sense for 3 years, and giving it up felt like giving up something she hadn't known she was attached to until the moment of potential loss. Or maybe because whatever Lucien was deciding about the organization's future, and she could see that he was deciding, could see it in the way he'd stood at the end of the evening, the posture of a man who has been handed a reason to do something he had perhaps been looking for a reason to do. Needed a witness. Needed someone who would notice, on the regular Thursdays that followed, whether what he said and what he did occupied the same space. She was good at noticing. She closed her eyes. Her shoulder hurt. She breathed in through her nose 4 counts, out through her mouth 6, felt the mattress under her and the cool of the pillow and the particular quality of her own body's exhaustion, the deep kind, below the muscles, in the architecture. The city was still making its sounds outside the window, the low hum of it, the train, the distant horn. The wind off the lake that came through the old window frame and moved the curtain slightly in its characteristic way. She thought, I think I have an answer to your question now. And she thought her grandfather would have said, good. Now get some sleep. You can't protect anyone on empty. She slept. In the morning, she woke to light the color of pewter through the curtain, and her shoulder and her phone showing 2 missed calls from Hana and 1 text from a number she didn't recognize that said only, "This is Lucian. Tuesday, I would like to talk, if that is agreeable." The text had arrived at 4:17 in the morning, which told her he had not slept either, or had slept and woken, and reached for his phone with the particular restlessness of a man who has a lot to reorganize and is already starting. She looked at it for a moment. She typed, "Tuesday is fine." She set the phone down. She lay there for a few more minutes in the gray light with the sounds of the building waking around her. Mrs. Kowalski's radio through the floor, the pipes, someone in the unit above running water. And she felt the specific quality of a morning that comes after a night that changed things. The things were changed. The morning was still a morning. The city was still the city. Her shoulder was still her shoulder. And she was still the same person who had walked into the Velvet Lantern 3 years ago with 14 empty journals and a waterproof box and a skill set she had promised herself she would spend on something that mattered. She got up, she made coffee, she stood at the window while it brewed and looked at the November street below. The early commuters, the man who walked his dog at this hour every morning. The woman from the bakery 2 blocks over who came past with her rolling cart of supplies at 7:15 with the reliability of a fixed point. The ordinary things. The unremarkable continuity of a neighborhood existing in its own rhythm, indifferent to the particular reorganization of power that had occurred 11 floors below street level the previous evening. She poured the coffee. She sat at the table with the 2 chairs. She thought about her grandfather sitting across from her at a table just like this one, his hands around his green tea, his eyes sharp and present in the way they had been until the last months when the sharpness had dimmed. Not disappeared, just moved inward, like a light burning behind glass rather than in open air. She thought about the question he had asked her in the last year, when his joints had started their commentary and he had taken to teaching more than sparring. "Did I give you that?" She looked at her hands around the coffee cup. She thought about a dining room full of people who looked away, about a woman who pressed a messenger bag against her chest like it was something that had her daughter's name on it, about a man who wanted a balcony and had taken it and had arrived, in the end, at a room smaller than the one he started in, about a 22-year-old who turned around with his hands open, about a detective who had waited 3 years for a call that came as a statement instead. She thought about what it cost to do a thing correctly when correctly was not easy, when it took 3 years of Thursday nights and a shoulder that was going to require imaging, and the particular loneliness of a person who never told anyone what they were carrying because the weight was theirs and the work was theirs, and that was simply the shape of it. She thought, yes, you gave me that. She drank her coffee. The November light came through the window and landed on the table between the 2 chairs, and the city went on being the city outside, and her shoulder went on being her shoulder, and she sat with all of it. The cost and the outcome and the long, quiet distance between who she had been at 25 when she first made the promise and who she was now, sitting in the gray morning light in an old sweatshirt that still smelled faintly of cedar and green tea. The story that spread through certain parts of Chicago. After that Thursday was not accurate in its details. Stories that pass through the underground rarely are. The facts replaced by the version of the facts that the story needs to be. But the shape of it held, that a waitress at the Velvet Lantern had stood between armed men and an unarmed woman and had not broken. That she had moved through a night of orchestrated violence with something that looked less like fighting and more like clarity. That she had handed the most powerful criminal in Chicago the means to dismantle a conspiracy inside his own organization, and he had used it, and the organization had not looked the same in the months that followed. The legend, such as it was, said she had defeated the mafia in front of their own boss. What it didn't say, what legends rarely contained because legends were about the spectacular moment rather than the 3 years of patient, invisible work that made the moment possible, was that she had done it the way her grandfather had taught her to do everything difficult, without wasting energy, without striking in anger, without harming anyone who was not actively in the way of something that needed protecting. And then she had gone home. And in the morning, she had gotten up. And the Thursday after that, she put on her uniform and walked down the stairs past Mrs. Kowalski's door and through the November streets to West Huron and through the dry cleaning shop and down the cedar staircase and through the double doors into the amber light of the Velvet Lantern. And she tied on her apron and picked up her order pad and went to work. The room looked at her differently now. Every employee, every regular guest who had been there that night, and some who hadn't, but had heard the shape of it. The bartender who had never once initiated conversation with her in 3 years caught her eye that first Thursday back and gave her a single nod of the kind that contained considerably more than a nod usually did. The sous chef who had tracked her moving through his kitchen twice in one night found reasons to be at the pass when she came through to place orders, and asked once, in his clipped professional way, whether her shoulder was healing and accepted her answer of fine with the understanding that it was a partial answer and that was acceptable. She was the same waitress. They were the same people. The room was the same room, and none of it was the same at all, which was not something that could be explained and was not something that needed to be, because the people in it had been there, and presence is its own explanation, and some things that change don't announce themselves. They simply become the new way the room feels when you walk into it, and after a while the feeling is just the room, and the room is just where you are, and the work continues. She refilled table 4's water. She checked on the lamb at the pass. She kept her eyes open. Above the main floor, the balcony was occupied. Lucien Viscari sat with his second glass of Barolo, the good one, the 09, and looked at his city moving below him, and once, in the amber light of an ordinary Thursday, his eyes found the waitress moving between her tables in her plain gray uniform. She did not look up, but she knew he was there, and he knew she knew. And the evening moved forward the way evenings do, one moment becoming the next, the white peonies on every table catching the light, the city above them going on being the city, indifferent and enormous, and full of people who would never know what had happened in this room on a cold November Thursday, and would go on being protected, in ways they would never think to name, by someone they would never know to thank.